is. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever time it is. We're so happy you're here. I'm the Reverend Cheryl Butler, and this is Journey Road Ministries, where we seek to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with our God. Well, these are certainly some strange times we're living in, and I don't know about y'all, but it can be kind of stressful. Just political divisiveness, the living with alt truths, this pandemic and social distancing, and it just, I just think like, am I in this twilight zone? It's just seems so bizarre, the things that are happening, that even a short time ago we could not have imagined this exceptional political climate. I've always been very interested in history, and so I know there's been terrible times in our history that are perhaps would have been worse than what we are seeing today. But we're not living in the past, we're living in the present. And we have to face the challenges we have today. And I think most people are trying to do our best to get along in the world and to hold on to our humanity and to care about each other the best we can. And sometimes that seems like a very difficult thing, especially when our differences seem so great. And so that's what I encourage you to spend some time with the God of your understanding. And we invite you to listen to our spiritual messages and how they might be helpful to you on your journey. But I think what I'd like to do before we have our sermon today is to share a psalm. Something when I was critically ill for a while, I found the Psalms to be particularly comforting. And I really like this translation. These are Psalms for Praying by Nancy Merrill. So they're kind of an interpretive version of the Psalms. And I would like to read Psalm 149 today to provide, I think, a little bit of comfort in the stressful day. Praise the beloved. Sing a joy-filled song, praising the Blessed One among the people. Be glad in the Creator. Rejoice in divine love. Praise the Holy One with dancing, with melodies and voice. For the beloved dwells within, journeying with us through all our lives, leading us in truth and love. The humble are adorned with honor, the faithful exult in glory, singing the joy with thankful hearts, with truth on our tongues, with gratitude as our friend. We are in harmony with the universe as we hold hands with all the people. The chains of oppression are broken, the fetters of injustice unbound. The realm of peace and love shall reign. Glory abides with those who are faith-filled. Praise the beloved. All people on earth welcome love's companioning presence into your hearts. We say amen. So today we have the Reverend Mary Dyer, who is going to share her wisdom with us.
My homily today I entitled Moonstones, Cloying the Hearing Dog, and Masks. Sort of sounds like one of those things you find on Facebook or something, that one of these things is not like the other. Well, today I'm going to prove to you that each of these things is exactly like the other. The moonstones, the dog, and masks. Ordinarily, when I turn to the Sunday lectionary for when I preach, I just read through it and something leaps out at me and sort of grabs me by the throat. So it's like I have to write on that. This time, though, it took me weeks to keep reading and reading and reading and maybe trying to exchange with somebody else. I couldn't really find anything that excited my passion or my interest. The Passover is a pretty interesting story when the Jews have to sacrifice a lamb and then put the blood over the lintels of their doors so that Yahweh going by will not kill their firstborn and just kill the firstborn of the Egyptians. And I did not want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. I'll leave that for somebody wiser or stupider than I am. But it kept coming back to the readings, but one in the Hebrew scriptures and one in the Christian scriptures that really parallel, and it talks about how we need to be in community. The first one from Exodus says, "So ye mortal, I've made a sentinel for the house of Israel. Whenever you hear a word from my mouth, you shall give them warning from me. If I say to the wicked, O wicked ones, you will surely die, and you do not speak to warn the wicked to turn from their ways, the wicked shall die in their iniquity, but their blood I will require at your hand. But if you warn the wicked to turn them from their ways, and they do not turn from their ways, the wicked shall die in their iniquity, but you will have saved your life." It really talks about God here demanding followers to try to speak to those that are doing evil, and that they cannot be pushed aside and just say, it doesn't matter to me, I'm just living my own private life following the Torah. But you have this obligation to speak out in the face of injustice. And then in the Christian scriptures, there's another one that is also interesting that talks about how we live in community, how we need to live in community, because being a Christian is not being a private individual follower of Jesus. It's belonging to some sort of a community. And this in the book of Matthew, chapter 18, 15 to 20, has the same admonition. If another member of the church sins against you, go and point out the fault when the two of you are alone. If the member listens to you, you have regained that one. But if you are not listened to, take one or two others along with you, so that every word may be confirmed by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. The message is virtually the same. Go directly to the one who sins and speak with him. Then it is filled out more than take more from the congregation to speak as witnesses. But it also starts with a direct meeting with the one who is deemed to be a sinner. So you can't just say, someone said, I heard that, or parking lot gossip. It is a direct, assertive communication. And then Jesus ends the passage with, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there among them. The main point I see in both of these readings as being a member of a faith community isn't a private, personal deal. It means living responsibly in community. And that's hard. The 2 passages mentioned above, the admonition to those who are on the right side, who are called to confront those who have somehow strayed from the path. But for me, and hopefully for you too, if you're honest, if I'm honest, this is a two-edged sword. We are not always the one in the right, although we tend to think that we might be most of the time, are the ones who are more virtuous or more faithful or more spiritually mature. So I looked at my own life to examine more deeply how tricky and sometimes difficult and painful it can be to live in community. First, when I was a child, one of my favorite adventures was to go with my dad down to the shore. We lived in Southern California, so we would walk down to the Pacific Ocean and we would go hunting moonstones, otherwise called agates. And once I found them, I would stick them in my pocket and rush home and put them in my little tiny treasure chest. I kept that for many years and somehow I lost it. And whenever I opened it, I would think of my connection to my father and the wonderful days we spent on the beach. And they were, to me, more precious than silver or gold or diamonds. When I found myself many years later, again living on the coast, I took up my hobby again of hunting for moonstones. I'd put my treasures in my pocket and go home and notice that each one had its own unique beauty. But some of them were a little rough around the edges, probably most of them, and so I went out and I actually bought a rock grinder, which I'd never used before, and put it in the garage. It took like an entire month, and I put all of these stones in together and started off with very coarse grained sand and water, plugged it in, went back a week later, took out those grains and put in slightly less coarse grains, did the whole process again, and finally I ended with very, very small grains of sand to finish off the process. And this is what I found. I found a Japanese liquor bottle, somehow remarkably unbroken, that had traveled its way across the waves from Japan to Oregon, actually. And I decided to put these newly cleaned and unique moonstones in there, and I keep it on the mantle. And it reminds me a lot of living in community. I know that these stones don't have intelligence or awareness, but we as Christians do, and living in community is not easy. We tumble against one another, we find each other's flaws and hard edges, we call each other to account, and it hurts. It hurts both to have the wisdom and courage to speak out to somebody that may need to be spoken out to, and it hurts probably even more when somebody speaks out to us. But it's only when we go through that very long, years-long process that we actually, in the company of one another, find our own beauty and our own uniqueness. So the second example, Chloe the rescue dog, is another story about living in community. I had, at the time, I was 72 years old, and we had a lot of cats inside and outside, and a couple of tortoises thrown in for good measure. And I really, since I'm the animal person in the relationship, didn't really want to get another dog because of my age, and I couldn't imagine having that animal live beyond me. Cheryl's a cat person, not a dog person, so I was fairly firm in that decision until one day when Cheryl was gone on business. I was actually watching television in the dark, and lo and behold, I am deaf and I have a cochlear implant, but I use the telecoil setting when I'm watching TV, which means I can't hear background noise. I looked up and a friend was standing in front of me. It startled me. And what had happened evidently was that she'd knocked on the door, looked in through the window in the door and saw me sitting there, and I obviously wasn't responding because I couldn't hear her, so she came in and after I took a couple of breaths and she left, I really began thinking that maybe I was being a little too casual, living at night with an unlocked door and not being able to hear. So Cheryl and I went out to look for the perfect rescue dog to help me somehow be my guard, my witness to other people coming on. And we went through Chihuahuas and Italian Greyhounds, and I couldn't find any that fit the bill, but I kept getting drawn to the picture of one that was listed as half Fox Terrier and half Chihuahua. And she was also wearing pearls. So we went up to meet her, and she came into the separate room, and she was a little cautious at first, but I sat on the floor and she came up to me, and so we decided to take a chance on her. And just before we left, the kennel worker said she was returned by the last adopters. That should have been a warning. But anyway, I wasn't going to go back on my promise I'd already made to her, and I brought her home. And it didn't take very long to figure out why possibly she must have not quite fit in. Considering that she was 11 years old, she's like 20 pounds, she had the energy and personality of a 2-year-old dog. And she had longer legs than I'd expected, so she easily cleared the gates that I had put up in the house to confine her in the living room. Walking her actually was really dangerous. When I lost my hearing, I also lost any natural sense of balance. So there I was with a very overly eager 20-pound dog pulling at the leash and almost knocking me off. But I had to learn how to walk her. So we finally reached a compromise. When we'd go outside, I would hold on to the leash and wait until she reached out, and I had a really firm grip on her. And knowing her propensity to pull, she also almost became my outrigger. And it actually made me more stable when I walked with her, once I knew her propensity to pull. And then she really did serve the purpose. She would always sit right next to me on the couch, and she would bark at anything, real or imagined, sometimes more imagined than real. But I would always know when there was somebody, or possibly somebody, somewhere near me. I'm glad we had no neighbors, because they also would have known. And so it took her a while to get used to our cats. And she still gives an obligatory half bark or lunge when they jump up on the couch, but they figured out she's just faking it, and now they all lie down in a munch once she has told them yet again she's a dog. And she's also fiercely protective of me, which has an upside and a downside. The upside is I'm her person. She's totally loyal directly to me. Even when she's gotten off leash in the yard, she doesn't run away, which would have been the end of her because I couldn't catch up with her. But she comes and plasters herself against the front door until I show up. She cannot leave my side. She gets very anxious when she doesn't know where I am. But the downside is when Cheryl comes perhaps to hug me before she goes out. I know Chloe, who really does love her, but she's not her person, will literally lunge at her to protect me. So I have to literally grab her collar so Cheryl can safely hug me. And yet, through this whole process, I really learned that I did not train her. We actually trained each other. We learned through adaptation of both of our personalities and habits how to live together smoothly and in community. And so those both early examples are both of the Moonstones and how, for me, that's an image of Christian community. And my dog, where it wasn't me teaching her, but she teaching me as well, until we learned better how to accommodate each other's needs and to live amicably together. The third one's a little further along. That's just talking about the Christian community of the church or whatever group where you define yourself as a Christian. And this involves, if we're truly following Jesus, we don't just sit in a house or in a church or communicate with people online about how to be. We actually have to go out. And as I mentioned, I have hearing loss. So several weeks ago, I decided to go through the drive-in window by myself. Usually Cheryl's either driving or sitting next to me so she can be the communicator if I don't hear something well. And so I was on my own, and so I drove up and I saw this sign that she's going to show you, and it talked about how there are hearing assistants and blind assistants. And I was so elated somebody finally thought about me and thought about other people like that. So very excitedly I made my order and hoped that the person on the microphone heard it correctly and drove up to pay. And so I asked the woman, I said, well, what kind of accommodations do you have people with hearing loss? And we, of course, both were wearing masks. It was really hard to hear, and she didn't even know what I was talking about. And so I pointed to the sign, and so she had to open her window and look all the way out to even see the sign. She had no idea. So I drove up to the next window, repeated this whole thing, and finally asked to see the manager. He came up, and I told him about the sign. The manager didn't even know. Then in addition, he said, you know, I'm majoring in deaf studies, and I'm thinking, well, he should be a little more aware. And then he said, and I said, well, what do you have? And he said, well, we have Braille menus for blind people. At that point, my anger sort of got cut in half because I found it rather funny imagining a blind person driving up to McDonald's and asking for a Braille menu. But anyway, I got back to the point, and I said, well, that's all you have? And then I asked for the name of his manager, and so as soon as I got home, I sent an email to the manager, who wrote back and said, I'll try to instruct them. I don't really know what that means. I haven't had the courage to go back. This was repeated when I went to both grocery stores in town. You know, I've been very careful about not going out very much and just picking things I really needed and I need to eat. First one I went into, they had a sign saying we do not require masks, but we expect that you might wear them. And so as I was walking around, I was one of the few people in the store wearing masks. There was a woman, there were 4 little kids and a teenager. All 6 of whom were literally running around, no masks. So I went and knocked on the manager's door. Again, I got the information about how they couldn't mandate it. And so this was repeated in the next store, the same manager, the same thing. And this time I was trying to make something a little more positive. I was so angry by that point. I noticed other people, some of whom were wearing masks, not the majority. So I stopped each one I found in the store, keeping safe social distance and saying to them, thank you for wearing a mask. They all nodded at me, looked me in the eye, and said the same thing back to me. Thank you for wearing a mask. Then I, of course, came home and wrote to both managers of these chains. Neither corporation responded to me at all. So I upped the ante and actually wrote a column for the newspaper. I don't know if it's coming out or not, but I named the sources. I gave them the way to contact both of the managers of these 2 stores in town, and asked other people also to speak out and not just, you know, shut their eyes or try to stay away from the other people. And I saw that as the expansion of my following Jesus, of speaking out, not just within the community, but outside of it all. So Iowa is the #1 state right now in the union with the highest number of of per capita of COVID's cases. The governor, Cheryl's singing over there, she's not, but I just read an article yesterday that says we are. Anyway, we are one of the hot spots in the United States right now. The governor adamantly refuses to actually ask people to wear masks and even tries to interrupt people that are trying to do it. And people on their own say it's, their falsely perceived constitutional right to not wear masks and thus endanger people. So I went even further and I wrote this long article that I hope will be published next week, and people other than just me will speak out. And so now we go to a new store in other states. You can see the sign here. And they somehow managed to make masks mandatory, as a number of other large stores like Target and Costco have. And so let's bring this to a close. We started off talking about the passages in both Exodus and Matthew about our obligation to go first individually to someone that we perceive as being out of order or sinning, and then we take it to the higher level. So I talked about that, and then I talked about how with the Moonstones we actually do that to one another, and it's just the process of being polished into a better Christian within community, sometimes painful, but the result is always beautiful. Then I talked about Chloe, who's actually in the bedroom now because she likes to bark and intrude. So she's on a little vacation, and how she and I together had to work out how to live together. And then I talked about going to McDonald's and our 2 grocery stores and writing the letter and contacting all the managers, because I care about these people. I not only care about my own safety, but I care about the safety of others. I care about what kind of message that mother was teaching her children about it's okay to endanger other people. We're going to somehow be safe. We don't really care about them. And I find that deeply offensive. That's my community too. And so I urge you also now to go out, speak up, be safe, and wear masks. Have a good week. Done.